Britain's Labour Party has just solved a mystery for me. You see, I hadn't heard from Whoopi Goldberg for a while. Now, I'm over here in Australia, so a little bit out of the loop, and I'd wondered where she'd gone. See, I didn't realise where this strange and race-obsessed woman had got to since she last made a world-famous fool of herself a year ago with the theory that murdering 6 million Jews for being Jews wasn't really racism at all. It was nothing as serious as racism. It was more like, according to Whoopi, a family squabble between white people.
In the Nazis, they would say, yes, it's a racial issue.
Well, see, this is what's interesting to me, because the Nazis lied. It wasn't. They had issues with ethnicity, not with race, because most of the Nazis were white people, and most of the people they were attacking were white people. So to me, I'm thinking, how can you say it's about race if you are fighting each other? So it all really began because I said, how will we explain to children what happened in Nazi Germany? I said, this wasn't racial. This was about white on white.
You've got the Whoopi Goldberg doctrine there, right? Nazis, Jews, same difference. Both white people, you know, are fighting each other, although just exactly how the Jews were fighting the Nazis, I haven't quite got to the bottom of that. I mean, it's Whoopi. I mean, unbelievable. But as you know, or as Whoopi insists, racism is really more about all the terrible things that are done to black people. So Jews don't qualify. It's what was done to black people. That's the unique evil. That is racism. And, you know, you shouldn't try and confuse it by dragging in Jews, 6 million of them. So where had Whoopi got to after this amazing contribution to our knowledge of what racism really is and who qualifies? Well, to my amazement, I read now a letter in a British newspaper, the impeccably left-wing Observer, just up Whoopi's kind of politics, and it was signed, or so it appeared, by someone calling themselves Diane Abbott, who's also obsessed with race. And this Diane Abbott says, well, Black Lives Matter apparently, white lives seem of less concern, and in her spare time, she is actually the Home Affairs spokesman for Britain's Labour Party. So if Britain does win the next election, she would be one of the most powerful ministers in that government, telling Britons, in a sense, how to live, which is a worry, because this letter over her name sounds straight from the laptop of said Whoopi Goldberg. It takes exception to an article saying that Irish, Jews and traveller people, or gypsies, all suffer from racism. No, says Abbott or Whoopi. What's the difference? These people undoubtedly experience prejudice, and this is similar to racism, and the two words are often used as if they are interchangeable. It is true that many types of white people with points of difference, such as redheads, they can experience this prejudice. But they are not all their lives subject to racism. In pre-civil rights America, Irish people, Jewish people and travellers, they weren't required to sit at the back of the bus like black people. In apartheid South Africa, these people were allowed to vote. And at the height of slavery, there were no white-seeming people manacled on the slave ships. Of course, that's if you could ignore the slavery, say, of the Ottoman Empire. I mean, the word slave comes from Slav, which means, you know, white people from the Balkans. Now, all this is seriously weird, of course. I mean, how can we compare the racism towards blacks with the prejudice towards Jews? Oh, and redheads. Completely different, says Abbott, Labour's Home Affairs spokesman, or Whoopi. Completely different. Jews and redheads, they suffer the same. Just prejudice. But blacks. So, you see the point they're trying to make here, you know. The Jews weren't sitting in the back of the bus, which is horrible. They didn't have to sit at the back of the trains, bringing them to Auschwitz and to Birkenau and to Theresienstadt to be murdered. They didn't have to sit at the back. So don't tell Abbott or Whoopi they were victims of racism. Now, the reason I keep suggesting that maybe Whoopi wrote this letter, and it wasn't Abbott herself, is that since then, Abbott has released a very strange statement after millions of people read a letter and thought, what the F, is this woman insane? Now, we knew the British Labour Party had a real problem with anti-Semitism, but didn't its new leader, Keir Starmer, say it was all fixed? Well, apparently not. In fact, he's now suspended Abbott from the party while he looks into this. And now comes this even stranger statement from Abbott, that she wants to wholly and unreservedly withdraw my remarks and, get this, disassociate herself from them. As if it wasn't her that actually wrote them. I'm disassociating myself from those remarks. Wasn't her that actually wrote them, thought them, mailed them in. I mean, how could that be? I mean, well, says Diane Abbott, this terrible accident happened because of an initial draft being sent. So these weren't really her thoughts, or maybe, they sort of appeared on a draft letter that presumably she didn't check before someone on her staff sent it to the newspaper. And if she had only checked, she'd have never allowed it, of course. So we face two theories here. The first is that Diane Abbott is, of course, a liar with idiotic views on race and probably a bit of an anti-Semite if you really scratch deep enough, which isn't a nice thing to say or think even about a senior British politician. Or we conclude that Whoopi Goldberg has been drafting letters for Abbott. Who better than to do that kind of stuff? Whoopi has been drafting letters for Abbott, and this one got sent without Abbott seeing it and saying, Whoopi, look, this crazy race theory, it didn't fly in America for you, and I sure don't think it's going to fly in Britain. But really, it's probably not really just Whoopi and Diane Abbott, is it really? I mean, well, I think we're talking, actually, to be honest, something a bit wider here. More people than them that are thinking that racism is just what blacks suffer. And that term must be reserved just for them. And in fact, it's this kind of thinking that's exactly what you would expect when people are pushed into tribes where what is done to their tribe is far more important than what people within their tribe do to themselves or to anyone else. That's this whole victim politics. That is, whites now bowing before their black neighbours, begging forgiveness for racist acts they themselves never committed. This also explains why in the United States, an 84-year-old man who shot and wounded an innocent black 16-year-old who got the address wrong, knocked on the man's door, is massive news. But the black mob in Chicago, which last week jumped a young white woman at her apartment building and beat and robbed her, that's not. Or the fact that Chicago had another bloody weekend, 18 people shot, including children, and 1 killed. That's also not really big news at all, because, as most Americans would know, most of the violence is now inside the tribe. It's black on black, so it's clearly not newsworthy. And this view of suffering now, this hierarchy of suffering of the Diane Abbott and Whoopi Goldberg kind, probably explains why you cannot actually see the Black Lives Matter movement in Chicago right now doing anything at all. It's totally silent when it's unbelievable. More than 100 blacks in Chicago have died so far this year in shootings. More than 100 of the 162 people shot dead in that city so far. Black, when blacks actually make up less than 30% of the population. Shot dead in just one American city, and all I hear is crickets. Because most of it's black on black, it's inside the tribe, and and it's clearly not racism. It's not whites doing the shooting and showing the hate that's such a political issue, right? So 100 blacks, mainly killed by blacks, we can apparently ignore that. Apparently ignore that, because this is the poison of the identity politics pushed by Whoopi and by Diane Abbott. The dead are not mourned as individuals. They only count if the death somehow advances a racial grievance. 100 blacks shot? No biggie. 1 black teenager wounded? Well, the shooter was white? That is a huge issue. That's the poison we saw in Diane Abbott's letter. I mean, let's drop this fantasy that this was just a draft letter. 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust, up to 500,000 gypsies or Roma killed in the Holocaust too. It's not racism, says Abbott. It's not racism. They weren't black. Like there's that hierarchy of suffering based on race, black at the top, Chinese near the bottom, and whites nowhere. And Jews, well, they're now just whites too, aren't they? So no tears for them either. Not, it seems, from Diane Abbott, who can now never be trusted with power by the Labour Party that she disgraces.